Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a major development coming out of Eastern Europe that could shake the entire geopolitical landscape. Tensions between Belarus and Russia are reaching a new level of intensity, and the world is watching closely. Reports are emerging that Belarus has issued direct warnings to Moscow, signaling that President Alexander Lukashenko is no longer willing to simply follow Vladimir Putin's lead. This is not just a minor diplomatic spat. It has the potential to turn into a regional crisis, and it could have consequences for NATO, Ukraine, and global stability. Belarus has long been seen as one of Russia's closest allies, a country that has relied on Moscow's economic and military support for decades. Lukashenko himself has been in power since the 1990s, ruling with an iron grip while balancing Belarus' independence with Russia's influence. For years, many analysts believed Belarus was little more than a client state of the Kremlin, but recent events are challenging that assumption. The relationship between Minsk and Moscow is starting to look fragile, and the cracks are now visible for the whole world to see. At the heart of this dispute are several key issues. The first is the question of military cooperation. Over the past 2 years, Belarus has allowed Russian troops to operate from its territory, even playing a key role in the initial invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This decision was extremely unpopular inside Belarus, where many citizens feared being dragged into a war they did not support. Lukashenko's government faced protests and quiet dissent within the military ranks. Now, with the war in Ukraine dragging on, Belarus appears to be signaling that its patience is running out. Reports indicate that Lukashenko has been privately pressuring Putin to scale back Russian military operations near the Belarusian border and to provide more economic assistance to offset Western sanctions. However, Moscow seems unwilling to make major concessions, focusing instead on its own war effort. This has fueled resentment in Minsk, and it is believed that Lukashenko recently made unusually blunt remarks to Russian officials, warning that Belarus could reconsider its security commitments if Russia continues to disregard Belarusian interests. This is where things get interesting. A public warning from Belarus to Russia is almost unheard of. For decades, Lukashenko has carefully avoided challenging Moscow in public, preferring to strike deals behind closed doors. But this time, it appears that Minsk wants the world to know it is unhappy. Analysts believe this is partly a message to the West, an attempt to signal that Belarus might be willing to reduce its dependence on Russia if offered the right incentives, such as sanctions relief or economic cooperation. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin faces his own set of problems. The Russian economy is under severe strain due to Western sanctions, and the war in Ukraine continues to consume massive amounts of resources. Domestic discontent is quietly growing, and even pro-Kremlin voices have begun expressing frustration with the war's progress. The last thing Putin needs right now is an ally turning against him. Losing Belarus, or even seeing Minsk drift closer to neutrality, would be a major geopolitical blow. In recent weeks, there have been signs that Moscow is increasing pressure on Belarus. Russian media outlets have started publishing critical stories about Lukashenko, accusing him of being unreliable and warning that Belarus could face consequences if it drifts away from Russia. This is a classic Kremlin tactic, using propaganda to intimidate partners and remind them of their dependence. But such moves can also backfire, pushing Belarus further away. Another factor complicating the situation is the presence of Wagner Group fighters in Belarus. After the short-lived Wagner mutiny in Russia last year, thousands of Wagner mercenaries relocated to Belarus, where they have been training the Belarusian army. Lukashenko initially welcomed this as a way to strengthen his military while keeping Wagner under control. But now, with Russia struggling to manage its own internal security, There are concerns that Wagner fighters could become a destabilizing force, potentially undermining Lukashenko's authority or even threatening his government if Moscow decides to use them as leverage. This is why analysts are calling the current situation a red alert for conflict. While a full-scale war between Belarus and Russia is still unlikely, the political confrontation is heating up. Each side is testing the other's limits. Belarus is hinting at greater independence, and Russia is trying to keep its grip tight. If neither side backs down, we could see increased instability on the border and possibly more military maneuvers as a show of strength. Western governments are watching all of this very closely. NATO in particular is concerned that tensions could spill over into neighboring countries like Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. These nations have already increased their military readiness, fearing that any escalation in Belarus could lead to a wider confrontation. The European Union has also been debating whether to engage Belarus diplomatically or to maintain its hard line of sanctions and isolation. For now, the West appears to be taking a cautious approach, waiting to see whether Lukashenko's warning to Moscow is serious or just a negotiating tactic. Inside Belarus, the situation remains tense. Ordinary citizens are caught between two powerful forces, Moscow and the West, and many fear that their country could once again become a battleground for larger geopolitical struggles. There are reports of growing anti-war sentiment, and some opposition groups are quietly organizing, hoping that Lukashenko's dispute with Putin might open a window for political change. Whether that window actually opens remains to be seen, but one thing is clear: Belarus is entering a period of uncertainty. The coming weeks will be crucial. If Russia ignores Belarus concerns and continues to demand unconditional loyalty, Lukashenko might escalate his rhetoric even further. He could limit Russian military access to Belarusian bases or even start looking for alternative economic partners, perhaps in China, Turkey, or even cautiously in Europe. Such moves would mark a dramatic shift in Belarus foreign policy and could permanently alter the balance of power in Eastern Europe. On the other hand, if Putin decides to placate Belarus by offering financial support or granting Minsk more autonomy in decision-making, we might see the tensions cool temporarily. But that would come at a cost for Russia, which is already stretched thin on multiple fronts. Either way, this crisis is not going away anytime soon. It reflects a deeper trend. Russia's grip over its neighbors is weakening, and even its closest allies are beginning to push back. For viewers following this story, it is important to understand that this is not just about Belarus and Russia. It is about the future of the entire post-Soviet region. If Belarus truly begins to distance itself from Moscow, it could inspire other countries to assert their independence more strongly. This would further isolate Russia, potentially accelerating the shifts we are already seeing in global geopolitics. So keep an eye on this developing situation. The relationship between Putin and Lukashenko is entering uncharted territory, and the stakes could not be higher. Whether this ends with a diplomatic compromise or a dramatic political rupture, the outcome will have consequences far beyond Minsk and Moscow.